Hi, folks. Welcome to the I Write podcast, Wednesday's podcast, videocast. I've got Jimmy Hutton with me today, as usual, and Stuart Lockhead has remained with us, hasn't sneaked off for another wee holiday in the Highlands.
Not yet, but I'm not sure if I'll be here tomorrow.
And, of course, myself, Norris Stewart. Well, busy. We've got the Nicola Sturgeon presser. We've got yesterday's attack on Alex Salmond. We've got a new poll out, which gives us a landslide for yes, because it's now 55% yes, 45 no, exactly the same figures as no had after the referendum, and that was a decision forever, was it not?
Apparently.
Maybe start with that, because there wasn't a lot in the presser today anyway.
No, you're right there.
What are we thinking? Do we expect to see all the hyperbole adjectives attached to a 55% yes poll as was attached to the 55% Indy no vote?
Ooh, I'm thinking that we've had, of course, a number of articles about look how close we are getting towards succeeding, keep the heat, don't rock the boat. And it is one more percentage stronger than we've ever, than we've ever seen. Am I right? I can't think of it.
No, I think we've had a couple of polls that were higher.
I think they were outliers though, weren't they?
Yeah. I think the relevance is the fact that we can now turn around and say, so your no vote was the settled will of the Scottish people. So does our yes poll give us the right to say it's the settled will of the Scottish people that we want a referendum?
Oh, I think that's been a bit limp.
Mm-hmm.
But you sound as though you're asking for it. No, we've got to demand it, not ask for it.
Okay, so word it. What's your catchphrase?
You're a shower of fudge that can't win elections. The only thing you've won in years was a referendum, and you refuse point blank to allow the majority of Scottish people to revisit that referendum. How does that sound for a start?
I liked the Kenny
not catchy.
Fackerson one. I like the Kenny Fackerson one about red, white, and blue. I mean, we've got to the point where they will be panicking in certain parts of Ayrshire. They might be painting the curbs red, white, and blue.
This is Kenny.
Didn't do that there. That's usually Larkhall in Lanarkshire, isn't it? Where they paint the curb stains and the push doors.
Anywhere west of Bathgate, basically.
Not naming anywhere in particular west of Bathgate.
Well, okay, Armadale.
Let's be clear. Anywhere west of Gorgie, they're Ouija's.
This is Kenny Farquharson, his piece in the Times today, where he's essentially saying, keep your Union Jack out of Scotland because it helps the independence cause, not the unionist cause.
Right.
It was interesting because Kenny was fairly robust about it. He's a bit of a fence sitter for me, Kenny. I mean, I think it would be fair to call him a federalist.
I liked he came up with the term unionist ultras. He's not been the first person to use it, but apparently that's what he calls them.
He is right in one thing though, in that the unionists and those who do like to wear the Union Jack, who like to wave it, they've never come to terms with the fact that Scots do not see themselves as British. They've never come to terms with the fact that the majority of Scots never have and probably never will.
I think this is a weird question for me. I mean, I was born of Scottish parents abroad. I came first back to England when I was 8 and then to Scotland when I was about 10. So, you know, I wasn't really formed in Scotland, but I never, ever thought of myself as anything but Scots. You know, running about in the desert in the Middle East, I still thought of myself as a Scot. Never thought of myself as British. It was never, you know, my dad fought in the war. I wouldn't call either of my parents independence supporters, but we were Scots.
Well, I was more I was a Highlander first, although I'm Glasgow Tuchter. We regarded ourselves as Highlanders first, and then we had a sort of vision and a approach to Glasgow in this. Well, Glasgow in particular, it's a bit like what most Scots think of as their approach to London. So England, I've never thought about England apart from the fact that the number of products that said "Made in England" on them.
That's kind of. Sorry, Jimmy,
sorry, I was just going to say, mate, that the whole Union Jackery, the whole Union Jack thing and the British thing, it doesn't cut through with most Scots because they see it as an English identity. It's been Britishness has been totally subsumed into being English. So
I do think that's where Kenny is very wrong. I mean, the number of people that I speak to, you know, that basically get the Britain as England thing. You know, when you talk Britain, you talk about Britain overseas, they think you mean England.
Mm-hmm. But the English think that, mate. English politicians think that. Only yesterday we had Public Health England being rebadged as the National Institute for Health and whatever. It's hardly national if it's only in England. And yet they are perfectly happy to use that term national.
I think as soon as the English National Health becomes part of the marketplace, Scottish National Health falls under Westminster's British single marketplace.
Internal market.
Right. Because the minute they introduce any, which they've just done by making Dido Harden quite so important within NHS England, but they've now made it the case that you can't even call it privatisation anymore. The private sector is an integral part now of Public Health England and therefore the English NHS. So they will cut funding to NHS England and automatically cut funding to NHS Scotland because their funding relies upon their level of funding.
But look, I think as the eldest person here, my experience of the question of England versus Britain, the further back you go in my lifetime, the more England is and still used to some extent, especially in America. They still quite often think that England covers the whole of these islands. They don't usually call it the United Kingdom. They might call it Britain. Although Scotland does have a clear identity. As I said, I think the other day, it's noticeable reading foreign newspapers in English language foreign newspapers that if you mention somewhere like Edinburgh, it'll just say Scotland. It won't say Edinburgh, Scotland, Britain, or the United Kingdom. So Scotland has a clear identity across the world.
Yeah, but that clear identity is one that was created after the Union by Sir Walter Scott. It's a British identity of Scotland that we now have had plastered upon us for 300 years.
Well, but it does have a clear identity, whereas England, what is it? I don't think the brand England is anything like as strong. They have to manufacture it every now and again.
Well, I actually think England's brands are regional brands. Melton Mowbray pies, Yorkshire cricket. You know, you don't talk about English cheese. You talk about cheddar cheese.
I don't think the English give a monkeys about identity, mate. They have control over the neighbouring nations in these islands. That's the only thing that's important to them.
I do think that a question that should be asked. Well, let's presume we get a second bite of the cherry vis-a-vis referendums. I think the question that should be asked at every single debate is, who does England apply to for a Section 30 if they want independence?
Yeah, well, there's quite a lot of that. Yeah, but one thing that's always annoyed me is that you've got the national, whatever it is, the National Museum. In Scotland, it's the National Museum of Scotland. I bet it's not the National Museum of Ireland in Dublin. It's just be the National Museum. And you know, anything in Scotland's got to have Scotland added on at the end.
And I do think that we have to make the point as often as possible that the problem with the United Kingdom is the dominance of England.
Obviously, I mean, there's not a lot you can do with it. It doesn't matter what the relationship is, the formal relationship across these islands. It's like you sleep with an elephant.
I noticed Andrew Neil is wants a change in the, what do you call it, the franchise for any new referendum, it's Scots born. So it doesn't matter where you live in the UK. If you're Scots, you get a vote.
Yeah, aye. That's when you know that they're panicking, when they're desperate to change the franchise in the question.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, the historical fact here is that Scotland was required by England in throughout time, effectively, but certainly in the lead up to the Union, Scotland was required by England for its resources and its manpower.
But also Scotland and Ireland, right up until Culloden, were regarded as the back door. When it came to, after all, you've got right all through to the 17th century, you've got what they call the English Civil Wars, but they started in Scotland, and they didn't end till 1690 in the Battle of the Boyne in Ireland, and the Civil Wars didn't really end until 1746 at Culloden. And so London's always regarded Ireland and Scotland, and particularly the Highlands of Scotland, as possible backdoors to an invasion.
I think that's simplistic.
It is now, but back at 300 years ago,
it wasn't then. Aye, but the reality is, I mean, Scotland isn't a small country, but our population wasn't that small back in the 16th and 17th century either.
Well,
it was about 20. It was about 20% of what the English population was. It's halved in the last 3 centuries.
Well, they do. And the Irish population was similar to England's.
Aye, the Irish population was massive.
But Cromwell sorted that out for them.
Yeah,
aye, sorted it out partly, mate.
And famines and all kinds of things over the years.
The other thing that always makes me smile is when Scotland signed the Act of Union. We had no national debt.
Mm-hmm.
So the monies, what was the equivalence it was called? The money England paid Scotland was in compensation for becoming a party to England's debts.
Aye, and they've still got the cheek to run about, particularly the less well-educated ones have still got the cheek to tell you that Scotland signed up to that because we were bankrupt.
Mm.
Well, that just shows a remarkable lack of education on the part of people who think they know stuff.
For a country that was apparently bankrupt, we went very quickly from 1703 to 1803 and became a centre of the industrialised and educated world.
Mm-hmm. Aye,
in 100 years.
They'll tell you that was a union benefit. Sure, it was nothing to do with the wonderful education system that we had in place at the time, which
the SNP have destroyed.
Oh, well, apparently, aye.
Apparently, but I mean, you look at the new town here in Edinburgh. That was when was that started? 1765 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
No idea. Right, enough of this. It's really bad news for the unionists. This new poll, 55-45 for yes. Stuart, you get to pick the next subject.
Just a quick word about the salmon hatch. The Kirsty worked hatchet job on salmon, and we discovered yesterday, which is now the inquiry started, we discovered yesterday that there was a rumour around when it first surfaced that there were going to be accusations of sexual harassment against salmon. There was a lot of pro-SNP people were saying, oh, well, that must be coming from London. Well, we discovered yesterday, and Craig Murray confirmed it today, that the decision to go from
to introduce
investigating sexual harassment cases, but to go backwards in time, and to go for former ministers. They didn't like that in London at all. Sir Jeremy Haywood, who was head of the civil service at the time, was not keen on that at all. The thing was that Scotland and the Sturgeon and Miss Evans were entitled to go ahead on their own, whether the London liked it or not. So the decision was made here in Scotland to prosecute or to investigate former ministers, and it didn't come from London.
I think I've got to tell you, I think that's a perfectly sensible decision. I don't have any problem. The whole Me Too movement was about historical allegations, and for us not to have a system in place that investigates historical allegations would have been stupid.
I'm not taking a position for and against. All I'm saying is at the time there was a lot of argument amongst independent pro-Indy people. Oh, you know, who made that decision?
Well, I've got a question. So Jeremy Hayward, who was head of the British Civil Service, and is Leslie Evans' boss. So this was an in-house system procedure. You try to tell me that he didn't have the authority to say, no, we can't make it retrospective.
Well, that's what Leslie Evans said under oath yesterday. She said so.
She said he didn't agree with it. I'm asking why, if the British Civil Service is the British Civil Service, there's a different system in Scotland to England.
No, she made it stronger than that. Her answer was
no. Listen to what I'm saying, Stuart. Why did Hayward, as head of the British Civil Service and in disagreement with the Scottish government, allow a different system in the British Civil Service in Scotland?
Because you're talking about a civil service code, and apparently that was permitted before. They wasn't, the permission from London wasn't required to do what they did. They already had.
Right.
They already had
we
a fairness.
We have a Scottish civil service now, do we?
No, they had a fairness code from 2010 in Scotland, which they didn't have in England.
Wait a minute. This is the British Civil Service. Why are there different codes of practice for harassment, etc., in Scotland to England?
No idea. But the fact is,
well, maybe that's a question we should think about asking. Why did Hayward allow his civil service to have different rules in Scotland to England?
Well, I'm not certain that he did. When they actually brought in a system in London, are we sure that it's not retrospective? I'm not.
They don't have a system for ministers within my understanding from yesterday is they don't have the same system. They have a system based on the ministerial code in England.
I read the memo, the email from the Cabinet Office, Sir John Hayward's office, and it is clear they disapproved of the going backwards in Scotland.
I just think that, well, I'll be honest with you, as I said, I think that's stupid. Most of the allegations were historical throughout the Me Too movement. So to bring in a disciplinary system that wasn't capable of investigating historical allegations would have been a waste of time.
Well, that's down to Norrie. Norrie was talking about that to me before you came on, Jimmy.
I'm kind of with Jimmy on this. I don't see a big problem with it. But to treat it as a quasi-legal policy, you can't do it in law. You can't retrospectively go after somebody in law.
Well, you can.
Well, you can't invent a law and then somebody that broke that law that wasn't in place 2 years before gets done under it.
Yeah, there's ways around everything, mate. Look at how jeopardy has changed over the years.
You can force somebody to comply with a new law, certainly, but can you arrest somebody under a law that wasn't in place when they committed the offence?
No, but this isn't about law, is it? This is about...
It was a civil service code.
Aye, this is about a disciplinary code. This was about the civil service updating, in fact, introducing disciplinary codes that weren't in place, where there were gaps between the ministerial codes and what they've since brought in. I think it's a decent enough system. Well, it wasn't a decent enough system. The way that Leslie Evans portrayed it yesterday is that they made mistakes bringing in a good system, and that made a good system look bad. I have a major issue with that, because basically what she's saying is everything we done was right other than the things that we done wrong. And that is a piss poor defence for somebody at her level within the government.
As I say, I go back to my original point. I find it strange that the unionists aren't howling in anguish that there's a different system for civil servants in Scotland to civil servants in
Yeah, well,
England.
look, come on. Look, I'm going to have to tell the viewers and listeners what you said to me, Nori. I mean, you hinted as such before Jimmy came on, which was bearing in mind all the scandals at Westminster. They really wouldn't want to have a system to look backwards. After all, the most recent one, we've got an MP who's been charged with, is it sexual assault in, Tory
Rape.
MP?
Rape.
Rape. And he's still a Tory MP.
He's still sitting, yeah.
Still sitting. Not even
Well,
allowed to be named.
I mean, I don't think that makes any difference to the point I'm making. The fact that Hayward didn't want this applied in his jurisdiction, England, I think is totally understandable.
Well, the words more or less was they didn't think it was a good idea to go backwards, to go,
Right.
retro.
So why, when it's a British civil service, did the head of the civil service think it was a good idea to apply it in Scotland?
Well, no, you're going too far.
Well,
Aye.
okay,
what
was
Leslie
prepared
Evans,
to allow it to
Yeah,
go
but
ahead in Scotland.
what Leslie Evans said in under oath was that she didn't say that he couldn't stop it, but they had understanding orders. You could say they were allowed to go and do what they did. They just had disapproval from London.
So the case,
I
in
didn't-
fact, is that we now have a Scottish civil service who operates under different rules to the
Ah,
British civil service.
I wouldn't have thought so. No, I spent last night examining quite a lot of the published material that's been put on the website for the inquiry. The impression, you don't get that impression at all.
Well, well, sorry, Stuart. If the rules for behaviour in the Scottish civil service are different to the rules in behaviour to the English civil service, there are different rules.
There would have to be some changes because don't forget, we've got a different legal system in Scotland.
This is a bit more than that, Stuart.
I am not an expert on that much, but
This
Sorry.
is saying if you're a minister, you can retrospectively be caught under these rules. If you're an English ex-minister, you can't.
Aye. Well, why are you surprised by that?
Well, what I'm saying is,
But the head of the civil service in London doesn't give a monkey's what happens up here. And if SNP ministers are going to get caught, all the better. That's how
exactly
they
my,
would look at it in
Jimmy,
Whitehall.
that's exactly the point I'm making.
Mhm.
Did Hayward simply say, right, I'm not happy with this and I'm not applying it in England, but if you want to screw some ex-minister in Scotland, you go right ahead,
Aye.
lovely.
I
Fill
don't think
your book still.
I don't think you'll find evidence for that. But yes, it could easily have been the point of view.
Which then takes me on to the other point I'm making. Do we have a separate civil service in Scotland?
No,
We certainly appear to have
Well,
a
we do.
civil service code. We certainly appear. Well, there are addendums to the civil service code that haven't been applied in Whitehall.
judging by the material I read yesterday, I would have to answer no. It's huge amount of information flowing backwards and forwards from Whitehall to St Andrew's House.
And that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is, we now have a system in the Scottish civil service that is different to the system in the English civil service, which is all supposed to be the British civil service.
Yeah, well, it's still a British civil service.
So do civil servants in Yorkshire operate under different rules from civil servants in London?
Well, they must do occasionally.
So it would appear. No, civil servants in Yorkshire would operate under the same rules as the ones in London, but they would operate under different rules to civil servants in Gretna.
They have some delegated authority in Scotland under devolution. I think that's probably where it is.
And a different set of rules for the civil service.
Well, obviously, if you've got a different legal system, don't forget
Well,
a lot
right, okay. Take that to its logical conclusion. Somebody wants to stick it up a minister in England. They go to court and they say, oh, no. I want to operate under the rules in Scotland, not the rules in England.
Yeah, well, but if you're working for the civil service and you're, attached to a Scottish address, I don't think they'll be allowed.
Well, I think they might have a case because it's all one civil service, the great British civil service.
Oh,
And the question that you asked earlier does pertain. Why aren't unionists kicking up absolute shit?
About the difference in the rules.
Two-tier system operating.
Unionist ultras,
Mhm.
as Kenny Fackerson calls them.
Aye, the kind of person that'd get down on their knees and gobble Nigel Farage for a shot of his cigar.
So the other thing I want to see is a saltire on the Scottish Civil Service building in New Street.
Aye, well, here's another thing, eh? I think.
Well,
well, look,
we got a different civil service. Why is it badged as a unionist organisation?
To rewind to the Kenny Fackerson article, what he's kind of saying is they're making a big mistake, the unionists, by sticking Union Jacks and everything. And they could have said the BBC made a big mistake by broadcasting the Kirsty Work show the other night, because it seems to have annoyed an awful lot of people who were sitting on the fence.
I'm not so sure it was a mistake. I look at it and I think, all right, they've got even their own fans in the Daily Mail and the Telegraph came out and castigated Kirsty Work for that parody of journalism. But at the end of the day, it's done exactly what it was designed to do, which is
but it's
portray a split in the SNP, and it's got independents. Independent supporters are arguing about it. They are sliding into the two camps that they suggest there are, the Sturgeon camp or the Salmond one.
I don't think it matters too much.
I really don't think that's the case, because I mean, there'll be disagreement and there'll no doubt the fur will fly, but they'll still vote for independence.
They'll still vote SNP, they'll probably still vote independence as well, mate. But will they vote in the big enough numbers that we want next May? Will we see 50% in both polls?
Yeah, I think we're now at the point where the momentum is such. I actually expect the yes polling figures to notch up 1% a month.
I'd probably agree with you, mate. And I think in the constituency poll we'll get over 50. I think that's why they are now desperately promoting all these wee Diddy parties, and that's on both sides. You've got Diddy parties on the independent side, and you've got Diddy parties on the unionist side, and I think they're all being funded.
And what I hope happens,
way from London.
And what I hope happens is all the Diddy parties on the unionist side get enough votes to be, maybe not to get actually seats, but to split the vote even more. And I hope just before the election, all the Diddy parties on the SNP, on the yes side, all go, we've changed our mind.
That would be nice if some of them pulled out.
The Diddy parties is an unfortunate title. You might think they were all based in Liverpool or something.
Oh. I should explain to our younger listeners and viewers that that's a reference to Ken Dodd.
Is that Doddism?
The Diddy men.
Yes. Jimmy, pick a subject.
Oh, don't tempt me.
Come on, you must have something that caught your eye.
Well, as a sort of aside after Kirsty Work's piece, and I believe they showed it again last night, actually, which is
showed it after Newsnight last night, yeah.
Aye, but I do wonder just how far they're willing to go. We took a look at that, and we know it. Had that been transmitted during the case, do we think Kirsty Work would have been up for contempt in the same way that Craig Murray is?
Well, I mean, that she did identify one person, as we discussed yesterday, without naming them, but it wasn't going to be difficult to find out who that person was.
I wonder that, as I say, I think they're in absolute panic mode in London. I think the numbers, I'm pretty sure they've got better polling than anything that the polling companies do. And I'm pretty sure their polling is almost catastrophic. Hence the reason that, for example, the Tories have got rid of Jackson Carlaw and brought in Colonel Flood.
It's not going to make any difference.
No, and also why Labour are they're genuinely considering ejecting the bold Tricky Dicky.
Well, I have to be honest with you. I think the only thing, and I'm loath to say this out loud in case somebody with the power to do something about it takes it on board, is to actually do something to the benefit of Scotland, it would have to be massive. But I can't even think what it would be. But Boris Johnson to come up here and announce that due to the fact he loves Scotland so much, he's going to move all his children here, but he's going to give us £20 billion to build new roads, railways, whatever. It would have to be massive. And everything the Tories are doing at the moment is going to undermine the union. Everything.
Well, let's throw in another two facts. As on top of this TV show from Kirsty Wark, with Danny Garavelli's radio show, which I must admit I didn't listen to.
I did.
And then today, we have Metropolitan Police drops probe into Alex Salmond. This is not new news, but this is a rehash of a story. It's a link to the accusations about sexual harassment by Alex Salmond. Oh, he perhaps had the same behaviour in London, and therefore there should be another case there. Well, that was posted yesterday by the Times as if it was brand new. Anyway, the case has been dropped in London, but that sounds awfully like a coordinated attack.
Two things. That article in the Times, was it the one in the Times? I can't remember. There was
The
one
Times.
of the articles referring to the Salmond investigation being dropped by the Metropolitan Police, spent at least half the article discussing the alleged victim saying how scared she was, and that's why she wouldn't go ahead, failing to mention it wasn't up to her. It's not the victim's decision whether it goes ahead or not. It's a police decision to take it to the equivalent of the Crown Prosecution Office.
Aye. Of the four women complaining, only one of those was seen to possibly meet the threshold of evidence to be brought forward, for a charge to be brought.
See, my point is, it seems like, do you think the Times, which it's published in, just thought, oh, this is coming up, we'll rehash this story, or did they know Well,
the Garavelli radio piece last night, I listened to it, and her witnesses, for want of a better reason,
and
they were witnesses basically to Salmond's character, were Bell, who we all know is now rabid anti-SNP,
Alex
Leesky, who never worked with Alex Salmond on there, whose sole reason for being there, I think, excuse me, was to back up this tearful episode in Danny Garavelli's life where she was attacked after she wrote a hit piece on Alex Salmond on Twitter. Leesky then went on to say how terrible all these cybernats were, especially, well, he didn't say especially one blog, but he was talking about Wings, who he has a bee in his bonnet about. So there was a fair portion of the show was all about what terrible people they are for attacking people that tell lies in the papers.
The show was about them. It was about self-promotion for Leesky and Garavelli. Do please listen to this show and then go and read my article.
It was absolutely shocking.
Her Twitter trail was, oh, look at me, I've got a radio show on the BBC.
When's Smith's piece coming out?
Sarah?
Well, she was at the table with the other two. Has she not got something in the pipeline? How Alex Salmond stabbed my dad to death.
It'll be something like that. Alex Salmond was hanging on to my father's leg all the way up that hill, and that's why he got out of breath and had a heart attack.
I mean, and I really do think that this is going to backfire, is backfiring right now.
I think I get my kill at people on Twitter, mate. I think the Twitter sphere is vastly entertaining, but I've noticed already the massive drop-off in people retweeting George Galloway and his Alliance for Unity stuff. Even the bold Murdo came out with a couple of tweets yesterday, and half of the responses to Murdo were people attacking him yesterday. With people saying, mate, you're talking abject shit. I think they're a busted flush. I think that if this is, I'll freely admit, they're ramping up their campaign. They're spending massive amounts of money on Facebook advertising, on Twitter advertising, both through the traditional parties and non-traditional parties. But if this is all they've got, they're finished. When we get to the point of absolutely slamming them in the election next year, what have they got then when it comes to a referendum? What have they got to offer other than you ain't good enough?
I actually think if that happens, that they're going to basically shut down Holyrood. I mean, I don't mean literally. I mean, they're just going to take every power away from them. They're going to ignore Scotland. They're going to treat it like, you know, an infestation of ants.
I suspect this internal market legislation is going to be much broader than anybody's really realised.
Oh, it's huge. It's massive.
I would imagine it could weaken the protection we think we've got for the NHS in Scotland to start with.
No, there is no doubt about it. The minute the English NHS is accepted as part of the marketplace, the Scottish NHS under this legislation becomes part of the same marketplace.
And then something like schools, don't forget, in England, you have all these, you've got hundreds of academies now, and they've got chains of 20, 50 schools all run by one company. They're called charitable, but, you know, they don't, now that could happen in Scotland too.
Well, there will be no area of Scottish life that will not be impacted by this British internal market bullshit.
Hence why the SNP shouldn't be sitting on their hands. They should be absolutely saying, stick your internal market up your keister.
Well, they've done that this week in Parliament, and the only people that voted against it were, of course, the Tories. Everybody else basically voted to tell the Tory government to shove it. Unfortunately, with an 80-seat majority, they don't have to shove anything they don't want to shove.
So even wee Willie Rennie?
Willie Rennie's amendment got chucked out. It was something like the Scottish government should go down south, beg, grovel, let them do what they want to you, but talk to them while they're doing it. Effectively.
Can't we see it blocked in Ruthie's gaff, the House of Lords? If Labour and crossbenchers are against it, can't we find a way to introduce 100,000 amendments to it in the House of Lords?
I'm not sure Labour and Ian Murray.
In the House of Lords? SNP don't have anybody.
Well, I know we didn't have anybody sitting in the House of Lords, but can't we use the fact that Labour in Scotland and the Liberal Democrats in Scotland are against it?
I don't think they'll be against it in England.
Not enough.
This was not a difficult call for them in Scotland, but it could be a difficult call for them in Westminster, because they'll have accusations of supporting the SNP, and we all know how that goes down.
But when you look at the polls about English independence, and when they asked all these Tory voters and these Brexit voters, what were thinking about English independence, and they were getting 45% for that.
I think
49%.
I think they're just a sop as well. They're a sop to us, to shut us up, as if they're ever going to ask the question: should England be independent? Why would they want to be independent for three countries that they control?
Well, that's why we need to keep saying, who does England go to for a Section 30? And every iteration of that. Every time they talk about, you know, oh no, we're a fantastic country, whatever, you have to say to them, well, what does England do to get its independence?
Well, look at that. Oh, here's another thing, but it's obviously we're worried about creeping power grabs. And from the day after the referendum, in other words, the 19th of September 2014, when Cameron introduced evil, English votes for English laws, they've been taking powers back.
Yeah, after promising to do the exact opposite. But that's their real problem. If they can't win a referendum because everything they say you can point to what happened in 2014, the promises made then, and go, okay, you promised the nearest thing to federalism. Where is it?
Aye, the most powerful devolved parliament on the planet. What
You know.
happened to that?
You just go through the list. Oh, if you vote no, you'll stay in Europe. Okay, where are we now? Brexit.
Yeah, but don't
Every single thing that they claim, you can point to and say,
Aye.
why should we believe you?
Yeah, but we don't forget when they're saying then when they're saying, before the referendum, the most powerful devolved parliament in the world, they know fine that they're actually upsetting the north of England. So it was never meant to me. It never meant anything. They could possibly say that to the people of Manchester.
Well, I mean, there's part of them, they talk about Ireland and Wales being, the next dominoes if Scotland goes. But I think they've got to worry about Manchester and Liverpool and Newcastle, because if they see Scotland succeeding, they're gonna start screaming about the Northeast and, the Midlands and Yorkshire and Cornwall.
Well, I
Well,
think
Yorkshire in particular these days, given how much Yorkshire produces, how much UK food production is based in Yorkshire factories, and yet Yorkshire doesn't seem to see a particular benefit of all that production.
I'm not sure I'm right about this, but has Yorkshire not got a similar sized population to Scotland?
Yeah, but they have a problem with Yorkshire of their identity. There is a movement in Yorkshire to have a regional parliament. The trouble is, the Sheffield area, South Yorkshire, that likes to see itself as different from the rest of Yorkshire. West Yorkshire and East Yorkshire they have a clear Yorkshire identity, but the Yorkshire identity for Sheffield is different. They can't seem to agree on one identity.
Well, why don't we just piss off and let them have a bun fight about it? Why don't our government and the party that is going to win massively next year actually get off their ass and do something about this? Because I'm pretty tired of hearing Scottish politicians going on and on and on about power grabs and doing absolutely nothing to stop them.
I think the only thing the way to have to stop them is to have a referendum.
I think you're right. I think independence is the only way to stop England grabbing power from Scotland.
Hey,
and I think the negotiations, if we ever get to the point where we're independent, the negotiations should be handled with baseball bats. I think they can send a negotiating team to Leith. I'll batter the shit out of every one of their negotiating team, and then they can send a new one up, because they will try and rob us blind, as they've been doing for 3 centuries.
We have a couple of things that we can blackmail them with, not least the nukes on the Clyde.
Aye, but let's be honest, mate, the way they're going now, they're not going to be able to afford to replace the nukes on the Clyde.
Oh, Jimmy, there'll be children starving to death in the streets before the Tories give up their nukes.
Labour too, don't forget.
That's their seat on the Security Council.
Aye, but it's going to cost a hell of a lot more than the 200 billion that they talk about, mate. It's going to be at least twice that.
But a seat on the Security Council, Jimmy.
They'll lose their seat on the Security Council if we choose independence anyway.
I've got a prediction for you. They will actually sell working class children into slavery to get the money to buy their nukes. There you are.
A small country of 55 million people on the northwest edge of Europe is not going to have a seat on the Security Council of the United Nations.
A small, poor.
Aye.
Dictatorship.
One that has to beg its nearest neighbours, France and Ireland, to allow them to sail into their economies. Because that's what's going to happen after Brexit. England's going to be begging, and we're going to be getting the crumbs off the English table.
Did you see
something about it?
Did you see the latest negotiating ploy from the British government to the EU? They want to negotiate free movement of British lorries across 27 countries of the EU in exchange for letting Irish lorries pass through England.
I'd imagine that the Irish will just build a couple of big ferry ports and bypass Britain altogether.
I just go straight to France.
Why wouldn't they?
They already do.
They
I mean,
do. A lot of the stuff already
queues,
does, eh?
the queues at Cali are going to be huge anyway. They might as well build another port for Irish
And
lorries.
let's be honest, Ryanair are going to have a lot of spare planes that they convert to cargo.
And then it'll be worth us building a bridge to Ireland so we can just motor down to their ferry port.
I think we should already be investing in ports, mate. I think get rid of all these daft submarines that are sitting in Rosyth, enlarge Grangemouth so that the container operation.
There's a container operation there, isn't there? There's already one there.
It's tiny, mate. Spend the money and just enlarge it. When you look at the billions that were spent on Tilbury to enlarge Tilbury, and the hundreds of thousands of containers that are transported from Scotland to Hull and to Tilbury to be exported, it's just ridiculous. Can you imagine? Doesn't matter how much we spend, the green savings would be monumental just by exporting stuff from our own country instead of bloody running it on rail down London and Hull to be exported.
Well, there's a container port at Hunterston as well as Grangemouth, but Grangemouth is surprisingly busy. I mean, the container ships that come up the Forth to Grangemouth are a third or a quarter of the size of the big ones that go around the world.
So that's only because the port's tiny, mate. Just enlarge it. Same way. I always said that we should do that at Cockenzie as well. That's deep water. There's enough land around Cockenzie to make a decent sized container port, and the East Coast Main Line runs right past it.
Aye, but all these containers will be coming through Leith. Bugger that for a game of Sodgers.
No, I don't think they bring them into Leith. Too much money to modify Leith for that.
As I say, I think they should go round the bypass to Cockenzie, mate, or go via Grangemouth. But
I suppose.
The Forth could be used to export a heck of a lot of stuff that we send south at the moment. And remember, it wouldn't be seen as UK or British exports if we exported from our own country.
What would England do with their export figures? They'd have to invent something.
They'd have to invent something, mate, or alternatively, they could just hide themselves under the balance of debts payment that absolutely collapses.
Right, lads. Anything to finish?
Aye, let's all laugh at Gordon Brewer at 2:30. How grumpy do you think he's going to be today?
Well, I have no idea what he's going to talk about.
Well, he's always been a sort of sook when it comes to Kirsty Work and the senior Scottish journals. He's always kind of fawned upon those. So I think that I think he may well mount a defence of Kirsty Work this afternoon.
Do you think?
Well, I'm trying to think well, here we go. What I heard. Apparently, Kirsty works on £200,000 a year from the BBC.
And quite right too.
Okay, thank you.
She's a beacon of impartiality, guys. If Kirsty says it, it must be true.
Do you think she gave wee Jack McConnell the recommendation for that hairdresser's thing, that hairdresser's abortion that sits on top of his head?
Well, I'm going to say this, and I really, really shouldn't. I think Jack McConnell maybe took her dress advice for his pinstripe kilt.
Oh,
here, that's a bad memory. I think I need to go and watch the telly and watch Gordon Brewer.
Has anybody got any advice on techniques for washing your brain after Norrie puts images like that in your
Double whiskey.
Mister. Excuse me.
Cough it up, Norrie. Cough it up.
Mr. Bell tweeted me. That's A Bell rather than tweeted me and told me that Tory ministers have a methodology of wiping their brains, wiping their memories clean. They didn't know how much it cost or whether it was painful, but that can be the only explanation for the stances they take.
Aye, I noticed that not one of them has come out to complain about what effectively was quite a considerable increase in inflation this morning. You know, to jump from 0.6 to 1%, Had that happened
Inflation.
a few months ago, aye, we would have been kicking up about that, mate. But it's awfully handy because it allows them to put train fares up by 1.6%.
Well, it also means the banks will be putting up interest rates.
Yeah, they
There's a
sort
chance
of,
if it doesn't pop back down again. They're already saying, I'm too cynical, mate. This is the time of year when they gauge the inflation rate and decide what they're going to do with real season tickets for next year. So am I surprised that it's almost doubled in 1 month? No, not really, because it helps the train companies, doesn't it?
No. Okay, guys.
Oh, one last thing, Nori. That's a horrible background you've got today.
What do you mean?
I like it.
Oh God, no! Look at that.
It's be at home. It's be at home with your own Tory.
Right, I'm away.
A bloody Tory triptych. There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
It's art. It's art. It's not even comment.
All right. All right then, guys.
Okay, guys. Thanks, Jimmy Hutton. Thanks,
Cheerio.
Stuart Lockhead. I'm Norrie Stewart. And thanks for listening, folks. We'll catch you tomorrow, which is FMQs.
Woohoo.
So sharpen your knives. Cheers for now.
Mhm.